Hello, welcome to the March 26th, 2021 Club Cubase live stream. I'm going to do a quick audio test to make sure everything is happening and it's being heard by everyone. Hello, welcome to the March... All right, sounds like everything is coming through just fine. My name is Greg Undo. I'll be the host for the Hangout today, for the live stream rather. And how the live stream works, if you have not attended one before, is you could submit questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de, or you could simply type the questions in the live chat field. My name is Greg Undo. I work for the Steinberg distributor in the United States, Yamaha Corporation of America, as a product specialist, focusing primarily on Steinberg products and some help out on other aspects when I can. So I'll be the host. I am presenting from the United States outside of Washington, D.C. area in Alexandria, Virginia. So just a couple quick things during, like many people during the pandemic, I have my family at home, so I may get interrupted by my son, who will probably be very happy because he's on his last hour or two of school before he has next week off for spring break. So I may have some interruptions. You may hear my wife working directly above me. I'll apologize in advance for any interruptions. So you could ask your questions in the chat field or send them in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. The ability for people to ask questions will far exceed my capability to answer them in a real-time manner. So the questions, I will probably be behind on the questions. So if you have a question and you do not get an immediate response, we'll try to go through all of the questions chronologically as asked. So if we could try to avoid asking the same question over and over repeatedly, if you get to the point where maybe you don't see a response, that will just kind of slow everything down. We also, if you could, when you ask your question, sometimes some of the information that's helpful is which version of Cubase. Is it Cubase Pro, Cubase Elements, which operating system? So you can say, I'm running Cubase Elements 11 on a MacBook Pro with Big Sur, or I'm running, Cubase 11 Pro on Windows 10. That information is helpful. So, and we will try to have a timestamp index of all the topics covered in the Hangout today. We always have some people that help out with these Hangouts in addition to myself. So there's lots of people helping with, that can answer questions in a more real-time manner. So we have Agent K, who will do some moderation for us when necessary, but usually we have a very well-behaved group. We also, if you want to search for topics that may have been covered in previous live streams or Hangouts, you could go to cubaseindex.com, and that's created by Jan, who's from Stockholm, who's usually on these particular Hangouts. And that's a great resource. Also, another resource when the Hangouts or live streams aren't happening is the Cubase Nation Discord. And I think Jazz Dude does a lot of work with that. So kudos to all those people for their help. But we'll get started in just a couple minutes. But if you are watching this live, please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us who you are and where you're from. If this is your first live stream, a Club Cubase live stream, let us know that. We'd like to welcome you to the live stream. We generally do these every Tuesday and Friday, starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. We started a new tradition this year on the last live stream of the month, that we kind of cut it short and do a Zoom live stream, or like a Zoom meetup. So I could actually listen to you guys speak and meet you, and everyone can meet each other. So we'll be doing that after Tuesday's live stream. So Tuesday's live stream will probably be about 2 hours, and we'll do a 2-hour Zoom meetup. If you want the meeting details for the Zoom meetup after the live stream, you could just email clubcubase@steinberg.de. It's always wonderful to meet everyone. I think everyone enjoys that time of, getting to interact with other users and meet people from all around the world. So let's go ahead and see who's on a Hangout. If you're watching this afterwards, you may want to skip ahead a couple minutes, but let's go and see who's on. All right, so we have Wasted Gamers was the first on. All right, so we have Vinny from Orlando. We have Walter Blackledge from St. Louis. All right, so we have also Uno from Finland. Great to see Jeff Zabelski from Chico, California. Stefan from Sweden. All right, so I see a fellow Virginian from Douglas. So Doug from Virginia. I'm just curious what part of Virginia you're in. All right, so we have Robbie Bowling from Dallas. All right, so we have Thomas from Germany. We have Agent K, the mysterious Agent K, who no one knows where he lives. So apparently he's a secret agent. All right, so we have Lawrence from Rhode Island. It was great to have him on the last Zoom meetup. It was great to meet you there. All right, so we have Ken from Norway. All right. Okay. All right, so we have John Costigan from Kenosha. We have Trance 2020 from Berkshire. All right, we have Kent from Washington State. All right, so we have Soren. All right. We've had Filter Freak, who's happy that he's been able to do 5 weeks in a row. All right, so we have someone checking in from UK. All right, we have Matthias from Hamburg. I have 2 other friends from Hamburg named Matthias. We have Ali from Iran. Great to see you again on a Hangout. Okay. So, all right, so we have someone from the Isle of Man. All right, so we have Lloyd from Mississippi. We have Jerusalem, South Korea. I know it's probably really, really early in the morning. All right, so Doug is in Charlottesville. So I went to college across the mountain there at JMU. My brother went to UVA. All right, so we have Tim Weinheimer from Mission Viejo, very dedicated Zoom meetup attendee. Great to see you on. All right, so we have Martin from Newark. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay. All right, so we have a question from Philip. Is it true that the dongle is gone? I'm back. If so, is struggling with Logic. So the dongle is the USB e-licenser is still being utilized for the Steinberg products, but Steinberg has announced a new license management system in the future that will not require a USB e-licenser. So, you know, they've had a couple of announcements. There aren't a lot of details about it, but the licensing system will be migrating away from the USB e-licenser. I'm not sure what the time frame is. I imagine it's going to be months in the future, but they just wanted to be kind of transparent with the different customer base so that people could get prepared for any changes in license management. All right. All right, so we see Jeff Zabelski's mentioning he's not in the living room anymore. And he seems to be enjoying his new computer build. It's been fun to watch him pick out all the components over the time. Okay, so we have a question. Is there a way to create an arrangement with the arranger track and save that as a template to load the arrangement in other sessions? So a lot of times, you know, one way that you could do this, if we had an arranger track, you know, it could obviously be stored within a template. But let's say if I come here and I have my arranger track, and let's say this is a song structure that I wanted to use, and I'll just hold down Alter Option, and we could label these, and we'll say intro, and I'll just call this verse, All right, so we'll just come right over here, say chorus, and verse 2. And we'll call this bridge. And then we'll just say solo. So let's say this is our arrangement that we wanted to be able to export to other projects. So I will just come over here. I'll just do a quick save as, and I'll just put this into a different folder for today. Okay, so now if I wanted to do a new project, all I'd have to do, if I wanted to import the arranger track from a different session, I could go to import and choose to import track archive. I will now go to that path. So let's say I'll just go to my projects. And sorry, I'll just say import tracks from projects, if I did it right this time. So I have all these different tracks, and what I could do now is to just find the arranger track. Let me just thought the arranger track was part of it. Let me just see quickly where I'd saved it. I'm just trying our project where I thought I had an arranger track saved. Just find. So I thought that the arranger track was saved, but we could probably also take a different approach to it. So let's say if I save the arranger track as a track archive, let's see if that will allow me to. All right. So I'll just put this as a arranger track on my desktop. So yeah, it doesn't look like the arranger track can be exported. I thought it could be imported, but I guess I'm mistaken. But you can just have the arranger track here. I think that you could copy like the arranger track event, but if it's stored as part of your template, you can just be able to take, the particular template and be able to have that automatically carried over within your template if you're starting off. But it doesn't look like you can import those, and I can see where that could be kind of more track specific. But yeah, so it looks like you may have to just have it as part of the template. Okay, so we see from Sound Business, I would like to use my Yamaha Motif ES8 as a MIDI and transfer controller, but it doesn't recognize it with the USB cable. Is there a way to use with USB cable in Cubase? So you could definitely use your Motif ES8, but it may not be plug and play. You'll probably have to actually install the drivers. So if you install the Yamaha Steinberg USB driver, it will then show up as an available option. So once you go to kind of like your MIDI port setup, you should see the Yamaha Steinberg USB driver indicate here, but it's not I don't think it's a class compliant plug and play. And also make sure that when you're using the controller, you could choose whether the MIDI information is sent out of the 5-pin MIDI, like the 5-pin DIN MIDI connection, or over USB. It doesn't do both simultaneously, so you may have to go into your Yamaha Motif ES8 and just simply make sure it's transmitting MIDI over USB. And make sure that you have the Yamaha USB MIDI driver installed, and you're able to have direct MIDI communication with that as well. So, okay. So we have a question from Ali. Greg, I think that we would need the pitch shifter to pitch more than 16 semitones. All right, so there could be a couple ways to approach this. So let's say if I wanted to take this guitar sample, and let's say if I transpose, here you could just choose to do 2 octaves. So if you wanted to, you know, just on playback. So if you wanted to just come here. So let's say I'll just take, so if I wanted, then this will probably sound awful because it's such a huge jump, but so you don't have to do anything there, but you could also just create a macro. So if you wanted to go to, you know, so say if I wanted to do it via a direct offline process, I could come directly over here. So let's say we'll add our process to the pitch shifter. And I think that this offline process is set up to be 16 semitones here. But you could always just kind of do that process. You know, you could even create a macro just to drop that. So now if I wanted to, see if I can add a second pitch shift. So now as we do that, we can have it pitch shift just twice. So, or you could just have it pitch shift once. So let's say if I wanted to just delete. So you could just run the same process twice and get, you know, kind of an infinite number of pitch shift. But if you want to do it quickly, you could also just do it from the transpose from the info line. So if you wanted to see what it sounds like, kind of to make sure it's, you know, that's what you want to do, you could do that. But you could always run multiple stages of the pitch shift to get whatever number that you want. So let's say I'll just delete that and we'll go back to where we were. All right, so we have Ali from Baran. All right, getting a bunch of emails today. All right. All right. Okay, so occasionally my chat field jumps on me because I probably get so behind. So I'll apologize if I lose anyone's questions. Okay, so question. Hi, Greg. In the system preference windows, when do I have to enable the check field for the external clock field? I have a Focusrite 18i20 Octapre connected by ADAT. Must this be enabled then? All right, so what you want to do, if you need it to clock between your mic pre, okay, so you have Octapre connected to Focusrite. So, in essence, what you need to do, often those settings are kind of outside of Cubase for the clock. So often you would tell the audio interface to clock to the mic pre, or you have the mic pre rather lock to the clock of the audio interface. You could do it either way. But it's really kind of the connection between those two. But when you come over here, you could see in the audio system, and you could have this be externally clocked. And if you have like a digital connection, you could tell Cubase which clock to be using. So if you had something like a studio master clock, something like people would use like in the older days, aardvarks or Apogee Big Bends. A lot of people for external clocks will use trying to think the new aardvark company where those guys went. So at that point you could have Cubase externally clocked, and you could tell where Cubase is getting the master clock for the audio interface. But often if you're clocking the mic pre to the interface over a digital ADAT connection, you just want to tell that the mic pre is getting its clock from, that the mic pre is getting its clock from the audio interface. And that's kind of outside of Cubase. But if you want Cubase to do the clocking from the BNC or from an ADAT or an AES connection. So if you have a digital connection, which my interface I'm using currently doesn't, you could activate the external clock for the interface. But and so right now you see clock source internal, but when I do this, you could choose at what source the clocking is coming from. But just to get the mic pre with the digital connection connected to your interface, it's kind of outside of Cubase. But when you hear a bunch of pops and crackles, would be indicative that there isn't a hardware setting for that. And it could be a software setting, maybe in the Focusrite control panel for your 18i20, that's serving as the master clock. But then you have to tell the mic pre to basically, say, hey, I'm looking for external clock, so that the two are running synchronized. All right, wonderful to see Pablo on the Hangout from Galicia, España. Okay, so, all right, wonderful to see. Let's see, question. Hi, this is Martin from Newark, New Jersey, and I'm running Cubase 11 Pro on Windows 10. Is there a way to reset parts on the mixer, i.e. volumes or effects back to the default state? So let's say if I have a bunch of mixer settings here and I panned ever so slightly and I just wanted to go back to kind of the default state. If you hold down Control or Command, and you could just click in the parameter and that will take you to kind of the detente state. So this way, if I have all these and I just wanted these all to get back, you could just kind of click one at a time or multiple events if selected. So if I wanted to take a number of different tracks here, I could select these tracks, activate Q-Link, and hold down Control or Command. And then if you wanted to, you could, let's just say I'll set it to absolute. And so let's say So if I just come here and I have absolute set for the link mode, I could set them all and it'll all go back to default. So just click in the parameter and hold down Control on Windows and Command on Mac, and that will take you back to the default values. All right, so we have Seattle checking in. All right. Space Crawler from Germany. Great to see you again. All right, so we have Mika from Burlington, Vermont. Okay, so a question. I sometimes work on songs where the CPU usage overloads. I see this when I press F12. Usually on songs where I've imported 20 to 30 stem wave files, and then I use plugins. How to stop this? So, generally it could be that there's a couple of things that you could do. The first thing to do when in any default mode, if your CPU's kind of hitting the wall per se, you're kind of running out of CPU power, is, it could be because the buffer is set too low. So if you wanted to come over here, the first thing I would do is select your audio interface, go to the control panel. Most audio interfaces, you'll see a buffer size, and just simply raise that buffer up. The lower the buffer, the harder the computer has to work. So, raising the buffer will allow you to, it'll give your computer a lot more headroom to work and should free up your resources. That'd be the first thing I would do. If you're running a lot of plugins, you could disable plugins. It could be like, one plugin that's a little dodgy that could be causing problems in CPU. But the first thing I would do if you're running at a low buffer is just raise your buffer, and that should give you more, a lot more headroom to work with and free up CPU resources. All right, wonderful to see Jazz Dude on a Hangout. Also Matt Elston from London. All right, so I just see a question, dongle gone. So the dongle is still working. The USB e-licenser is still working, but Steinberg, as I mentioned earlier, that there will be kind of a licensing system that's not going to be based on a USB hardware piece in the future. So, all right, great to see Sub 403 on a Hangout from British Columbia. All right, short question, but maybe too simple. How to set up a pitch bend curve on existing audio material? Do it by reloading it in the sampler track and do it just there. That's one way that you could do it. So if you have, I'll show just one example. If you wanted to kind of play stuff in a more musical way, let me just see if I have a particular file. So if you wanted to do stuff like, different glide type of options. You could come over here. So let's say if I have, all right, let me just set this. You could place this into kind of monophonic mode, and then there's this little legato mode. So if you wanted to just play, you could do stuff like that. But if you wanted to also just take a particular sample, if you wanted to be a little more precise about it, and if it's not necessarily falling within like or something that you don't want to play, just go to your audio and go to direct offline processing. And then you could go to your pitch shift. And then you could see an envelope section. So here you could set the number of ranges. So if you say, okay, I just want it to do 2 semitones, you could just do different pitch envelopes for like different effects. You could just do directly there within the pitch shift, and you could set your range of semitones or different fine tuning amounts directly there. So, you know, you could do it in the sampler track, but there's also just the offline pitch shifting as well as another great option to work with. All right, so just see a question from Mark. What kind of CPU is more suitable for Cubase? I would like to buy AMD Ryzen 9 5950X. Is it okay? I've heard that Threadrippers are not supported. Is it true? And if so, will they be supported? So I know that there was a case of, you know, someone had sent some information to Steinberg on Threadrippers, and I know Steinberg, I think, is working through it with AMD currently. But that said, we have a lot of happy Ryzen users. And I know JazzDude does a lot of configurations with Ryzen. So there's many happy users using Ryzen systems or Intel systems. So it's really just kind of a personal choice. And JazzDude, since he does a lot, he builds a lot of Ryzen systems. You know, he could probably give some more information. So, and he's indicating that, you know, the Ryzen latest generation is great, generation 9. So. All right, so we have Cubase 11, Catalina, Halion 3 up to date, but having tuning problems. Reset Midi seems to solve it for a while, but tuning still goes flat. So I'm not sure if it's Halion Sonic SE3 or Halion 3, because the Halion 3 is probably, you know, 15 years old or so. But so a couple of things to check. Let's say if I just have a Halion Sonic patch here. So I haven't heard of it going out of tune, but I would check. So let's say if I just have like an electric piano voice here. But if it's Halion Sonic 3 or Halion Sonic SE3, you may want to check. We'll just come over here. Let's go to, or I'll just quickly add so I could show you something else here quickly. But check to see if when you go to the tuning scale here, that, you know, there is a separate tuning scale for the instrument. You can make sure that that is not set. You could also, you know, a lot of times when people complain of tuning, it could be, and I've seen, like I was just helping someone and ends up that their mod wheel was since on their controller, and we see this with older MIDI controllers, that the mod wheel, when they moved the modulation wheel, that the pitch bend wheel mechanism was moving, because they're often kind of next to each other on controller keyboards. So I would, if it's going out of tune after a while, usually it's in tune or out of tune unless there's a message being sent to the particular note, I would select the MIDI track itself and go into the list editor. And we could see this as kind of more of a, like a surgical editor. But let's say, you know, if I wanted to, you know, just go to this particular part, and let's say if I have, you know, different MIDI CCs going on, okay, I got some modulation, and let's say some inadvertent, you know, pitch bend, you know, we could come here. So this may not be so apparent when you're just kind of looking at it in the editor, like the key editor. So just out of curiosity, take a look at the part in the list editor, and within the list editor, see if you see any pitch bend messages. So a lot of times it's kind of like one pitch bend message that could make it, that was accidentally entered in or just hit when someone was recording, that could be causing that. So I would, really take a look at that part with the list editor and see if you see any pitch bend events that could be causing it to go out of tune. All right, so we see from Sub 403, and I think he'd emailed this in. Greg, is there a way to create a strum effect using the Midi logical editor? You could get very involved and create kind of multiple editor instances if you wanted to. Let's see if I may have like something I was messing around with before. No, okay. So I'm going to come and just enter in a guitar voice. All right, so let's say if I have my patched, it sounds kind of like this. I'll just do another. Okay, so let's say I will just take this particular voice here and I'll just So let's say I just have some chords here and I'll just mute the piano part. Sorry about that. Okay, so if you wanted to, do some different things with logical editor, you could create, and this could be like a really, not so fluid process, but you could create something like, just come over here to logical editor. And if you wanted to, I'll just erase this bad note here. I guess I wanted to transform notes, and I could choose a context variable and say I want to choose inside range, and we could say like the note number in the chord. So I want the note number 1. And let's say I wanted to adjust the position of that. And I could add, let's say, 60. So I could just kind of select, some of the different aspects here. And so if I wanted to just apply, you could have notes that are kind of shifted. Let me see, I may have even done this. So now I could just kind of have notes that are shifted a little bit like this. So I could just So you could create kind of, basically saying is, take the highest note in a chord and shift it over. And you could create some kind of, instead of it being just a straight block chord, and you could say, you could create another logical editor preset and say, okay, shift that over slightly more for the, or a little less for the other note. And then you could just create kind of like some strumming effects like that for if you wanted something a little more interesting. Another tool that you could use that a lot of people miss is just the trim tool. And if you hold down like the Alt or Option, you could just kind of come here and just kind of stagger the starts of different notes. And sometimes this may be a little more effective depending on the rhythm and what's going on in the track. So now that I've done that, you could, you know, come up with like some different kind of strumming type of effects, you know, quite easily and kind of alter it as needed for the musical context. So, you know, check out also just the trim tool and, you know, hold down the Alt to do it. Otherwise you could cut the ends of the notes. But if you hold down Alt or Option, you could just stagger that and kind of create more interesting strumming and different variations quite easily. So, but you could create, and I'll just show you that logical editor preset again. So again, I just said we want to transform. We're going to say type is equal to note. You don't need that line. And we'll say context variables equal to note number in a chord. And this would be the second note in a chord. And then we can say position, add, and then you could put however many talks you want, you know, how many clock pulses you want. I just chose 75 there. So give that a try, sub 403. Okay, so we have a question. Martin from Newark, New Jersey, running Windows 10, Cubase 11 Pro. Question, is there a way to optimize Cubase to take advantage of a multiple core CPU? So Cubase already does that by default. If you come over here, we could say, okay, when you go to your audio system, you could, and this is checked by default. So if you select audio system, we could choose activate multi-processing directly here. But realize that when you're running multiple VST instruments, you know, if you have an instrument like a Hallian or a Contact that has, you know, 32 instruments loaded on it, you know, there's a lot of VST instruments that when you run multiple sounds within a single instance, that single instance will take one CPU. And that's just how that particular plugin is designed. So there's a lot of plugins that do that. So instead of running 16 voices in one plugin, you may want to run 16 versions with one voice, and that could scale across the CPUs. But Cubase is automatically taking advantage of all your multi-core processing, but sometimes some plugins aren't designed to do that. So you may see that it doesn't seem like Cubase is doing it, but it's really a function of the plugin at times. But there's, you know, but the only setting in Cubase that you have to do is go to your studio, to studio setup, the audio system, and just make sure that the activate multi-processing is checked. All right, so we see Jeff Savelsky says new Windows 10 build from Mac and MR8 16 CSX, which is old FireWire, new card drivers working perfectly. That's great. Thanks for letting us know. It's been fun to, I get to vicariously watch everyone get new computers except me. So. Okay, so just see from Mark, Greg, I have a few UAD plugins, but in Inspector, I'm offered all the UAD, including those I do not own, and it takes longer to find the one I want. I think that's the design intention of UAD, but you can probably come over here. I would go to your studio menu to VST plugin manager, and then you could create a new plugin collection by clicking on the plus sign. And then when you go to your own plugin collections, you could just come over here, drag and drop whatever plugins that you want. We could create a new folder. So we could say, you know, UAD I own, and then you could just drag and drop, you know, your different plugins to, you know, the particular folder. And only this way you could customize exactly what plugins you see visible. So you can make a new VST plugin manager, but I think that's the design intention from UAD. It's not a Cubase thing per se. You know, they want you to try every plugin, I assume, so that you'll want to purchase it. So. Okay, so we have a question. Is there a way to send a metronome to the QMix pre-fader so it is only heard in the QMix but not in the main out? Currently, I create an instrument track for this. All right, so let's say if I wanted to do this with a project, so I'll come over here. So one thing that a lot of people miss in the control room when you're sending out the QMixes, so the control room can kind of take care of this particular aspect pretty elegantly. So let's say if I have my project going on. All right, so let's say if I wanted to come over here. All right, so if I wanted to do like my control room, so what I could do is first I'm going to just select all of my tracks in this particular project. And we'll go to kind of our full screen mixer. And what I want to do is to, in the racks, we're going to make sure that we have the Q sends. And I'm going to just right click here. And we could say, okay, I want to use the current mix levels. So, and this is basically going to replicate the mix, you know, to all the different tracks. And then you could tweak it for kind of a more me headphone mix. Okay, so as we have this going on, I want to now, of course, it helps if I activate all the Q sends. So we have all of these kind of spread across. So if I wanted to, let's say, go to the bass headphone mix, and let's say the bass player like wants to hear more of themselves in their mix, I will just come over here and I'll just turn off my quick link. So I will just go to the bass mix, and so now when we listen to our bass player's headphone mix, so now when I do this, you know, we could have the click in the main control room. So we listen to like our main mix here. But if I don't want the click to go into the bass player's headphone mix, when I switch to the headphone mix, I could just turn off the click track that's going to their particular headphone mix. So at this point, I would just say, okay. So at this point, all you have to do is just turn off the click track in each of the so you can enable the click track in their headphone mix, but not have the click track in the main mix here. So we could have the click track going out to the bass player, but when I listen to the click track here, we don't hear the click because it's turned off. Then I could turn it on. But each headphone mix, you could have the click track. So maybe the vocalist doesn't want to hear the click, but the drummer and bass player do. You could just have the click set up, you know, and bypassed on each individual Q mix. So if you're using the Q mix for that, that's the kind of the easy way to have that work for you. Okay, let's see. What is the most effective way to do pitch shift of a snare during an EDM-like build-up? All right, so let's just jump back to a different project here. So there's a number of different approaches for that. I'll just revert this quickly. All right, I just want to check one of my preferences here. Okay. All right, so let's say if I have a snare. Okay. Okay, so let's just say I wanted to draw in okay, so you could do stuff like this. So let's say you wanted to go right, and now I could do, let's say, eighth notes. All right, so let's say we have a part that sounds like this. All right, and then I'll just put in some 30-second notes. All right, so let's say we do kind of a rhythmic build up, and I'm like the worst EDM person, but let's just go ahead and all right. So as we listen to this, we'll just, all right, not sure why it's stuck. I'm only playing back from, we just, all right, so some people will just, and depending on the instrument itself, I'm not sure if Groove Agent responds to pitch bend, but we'll give it a shot. So let's say if I just wanted to, all right, so, but let's go ahead and say I'll just render this quickly to an audio file. So come over here. Okay, so now we have our audio file. So let's say I will now select that. Let's go to direct offline processing, and let's go to our pitch shift. And I'll reset this. All right, and now. So you could do, some different stuff like that. You could also, put it into the sampler track and be able to kind of manipulate it as well. So a number of different ways of kind of doing different pitch shifting of snares. So even if you wanted to, you know, take one of the samples, and let's say if I just drop this into a sampler track, we could then kind of trim the starts. And then we'll just so here we could actually set our pitch bend range. So if I wanted to take just this particular note and drop in, let's say on our sampler track, so I think we're going to be at I'll just draw this in. So I'll just come right over here, and I think this will respond to and I'm just going to look at I'll just draw this in quickly. That's 30-second notes. All right, so say if I have, so now I could come right over here, and I think this will respond to pitch bend. And we can set the pitch bend range within the sampler track itself. So if I just wanted to come here, so you could, you know, just set different amounts. There's a couple of different approaches. Let me just talk to my son real quick. All right, my son has started his spring break. All right, so. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so we have a question from Robbie Bowling. So let me just open up a quick project. Okay, so Robbie's question: this isn't a major issue, but I still struggle with the musical mode, cues, the when and how. So just think of musical mode as like if you're recording your own projects, you may not need to use musical mode. When you'd want to use musical mode is when maybe you have a project and you're bringing in like a drum loop or something like that, and you want that particular audio file to match, you know, everything that you're doing. So at this point, you know, if I wanted this loop to, you know, select and be in musical mode, I could choose for this loop to be in musical mode. And as I adjust the tempo, so think about like this is automatically, when it's in musical mode, it's automatically going to just follow the tempo that you have on a particular project. So it's going to slow down when I change the tempo. And if I speed the tempo up, that's what musical mode is going to do. So often, if you're just recording your own tracks, you probably don't need to put those into musical mode unless you're like, oh, I want the whole song to be faster. At that point, you could place it into musical mode. But if you want other songs, other audio files to match the tempo of what you're doing, that's when you could enable musical mode. And that just allows you to have the timing of the audio match the timing of the actual metronome. So when you go to play it in, you could audition and that audio will speed up and slow down to match the tempo that's going on in the particular audio file. All right, so we have a question. Sorry, my chat field just jumped on me. Bear with me while I jump back. Okay, so we have a question. Having Halion 6 and Groove Agent full versions, does it make any sense having the SE versions as well? If so, should I uninstall them or is it better to hide them, and how? So I would say that if you had the full version of Groove Agent, that Groove Agent SE could be, you know, that all those capabilities are in there. I would say that, you know, Halion Sonic SE and the full version of Halion, I think still makes sense to have Halion, you know, for a lot of people just looking for quick sounds. And if you work with MIDI files, if you needed to hide them from your project view, you could just, again, go to your studio menu, to your VST plugin manager. And at this point, let's say if I just jump over here to my default, you could choose, you know, just come right here and say, okay, I don't need to see Halion Sonic SE. And then, you know, you could just kind of duplicate this collection. So let's say I'll just do a new collection, copy the current collection. Okay, so I will just kind of come over here. We'll call this collection Mark. Okay, and in this one, I can say I don't need to see Groove Agent SE because I have the full Groove Agent. So I go to my drums and then I could just delete that. And now when I go to add my instruments, so I will just click here. Let's add an instrument track. I go to drum, my Groove Agent SE isn't there. So that's all you have to do is you could just, you know, do a new collection, copy the existing one, and just hide the plugins that you don't want to see. So I would say that, you know, Groove Agent SE could be unnecessary with the full version of Groove Agent, but Halion Sonic SE could still offer some other components that maybe like that could take you longer to find in the full Hallian 6. So it's the same information kind of presented in a more kind of friendly format. So just that's how you could do it with kind of your different plugin collections. All right, so we see, hi Greg, any plans to implement modern drum pattern step sequencer like in Cubase future versions? So, you know, there are some already, so a lot of people may not realize that there's a MIDI plugin for Beat Designer. So if you wanted to come here, we could just say, okay, as I'm playing, and I will just solo only my Beat Designer stuff. If I'm here, I could just say, okay, how many steps do I want it to be? You know, so let's say, okay, I want it to be 32 steps. Then I could just come over here if I saw the right one. Let's make sure I'm on the... So, you know, if you wanted to just... So let's say if I'll just do maybe 16 steps. And let's say, okay, just put in a couple. And I want to put in flams. And I wanted to have different grooves, change the dynamics. So you could do stuff like this. Now, if you wanted to also just program directly in the drum editor, which is probably, you know, the most comprehensive, you know. So here I could just say, okay, I want to do, let's say, one measure. You know, at this point, I could just say, okay, let's, as we play, I just wanted to kind of paint notes in. So let's say, okay, let's just put in, see if I'm on the right kit here. So, and you know, you could choose to just kind of do all of your different programming here. So let's say, okay, let's start off with, you know, a kick. So let's say I want to clap, and I want this one layered. And I want to put in 16th notes. But let's say I just want it to arc. And I wanted to just take my hi-hats here, and then, you know, if you wanted to quantize and say, okay, let's just put more swing just on the hi-hats. And then, you know, just coming over here, just randomly, okay, I want to take a little bit of and now every time that I click on one particular lane, I could adjust the velocities. for that particular lane. But let's say if I wanted to come here and I wanted this this bongo to be entered in eighth note triplets as I kind of paint notes in. So I could even just come here and I'll erase all of, let's say, so if you want to do more kind of polyrhythm, so I want this to be eighth note triplets as I enter them in. And I wanted this to be 16th note triplets. I wanted that velocity to arc up and down. So you could obviously just kind of do and come up with different, so let's say I want to do a 32nd note fill here. So, you know, all sorts of stuff that you could do with the functions that are already there that a lot of people kind of don't utilize. Making drum parts. All right, so sub 403 wants people to hit the like button. All right, so we have a question. Can you pitch shift complete songs? Certainly. So all you have to do is, let's say, if I'll just take this project here. If you need to drop the key, you could add what's called a transpose track. So let's say, okay, we're going to do and you could just so that's just using the transpose track, and you could change it at different points of the song. You know, you could also just select all of your let's say I wanted to take all of my parts here. You know, I could choose to just I could choose to come here and just, if I select kind of not the drums, I could just choose to, now the drums aren't transposed. So you could do stuff like that as well. All right, so we have Michael checking in from Somerset, UK. Hi, Greg. How would you export stems if you're using the arranger track? Is it any different than a normal export? I think that you might have to flatten the chain first. So let's say I'll just test. I haven't done this in... Let me just... think I have something with arranger track that we could. All right, and my Cubase didn't like that project. Sorry about that. All right, so let me just see if I get that project back. Okay, so here if I wanted to activate the arranger chain, so when we do this, this will play back the project in without any of the so as we place back, let me just get it so you guys could hear as well. So this will play back in kind of a non-linear fashion. So when it gets to the end of a chain, so I think if I go to export that with my audio mix down, and I will just do a quick stereo out. Let's add it to the queue, and I'll insert it back into the project. All right, I'm just gonna undo that just because I had I will set my arranger track around the whole event here. Set my left and right locators. I'll do that one more time, sorry. So I think you might have to flatten it first, but I'll just test and see. Okay. Yeah, so to have the arrangement, what you'd have to do is as you go to the arranger track, just to flatten the chain. And then once you flatten the chain, it will, at that point, take into account all of the new arranger chains. So you just have to flatten the chain first, and then you export, and then it's just a normal export. All right, so you should see from questions, sometimes when I change audio to musical or formant, it changes all other instances of that event and all other cuts from that event. How do I make it so the edits only happen to specific clips? So a lot of times if you do editing, let's say we have one audio file that's being used repeatedly in a project. If we do a destructive process on that, it can affect all the other edits. But to prevent that, if you want to do editing on only one particular instance of that, you could go to your preferences, and this is an option that's enabled by default that most people, it's one of those dialog windows that will pop up, and then you could say, you know, don't show this again. But if you go to editing to audio, and you'll see on processing shared clips, just choose, you could have it open the options dialog box, or you could have it automatically create new version. So if I do processing, on one clip that's being used multiple times within a particular project, and I only wanted that processing to affect that one particular instance that's selected, I would choose create new version, or I could have it prompted, or we could just have it process everything every time that that audio file is being used in a project. So once again, go to your preferences to editing audio, and you could just choose create new version, and that will just change that behavior by default. All right, great to see Michael Teams on the Hangout. He's bringing ice cream for everyone. That's good to know. All right, great to see Millard Brown as well. All right, so Razel checking in from Denmark. All right, great to read that Jeff Zabelski's gotten his second COVID shot. That's great. All right, so I just see a question from Delif Renderath. Where are these questions posted? So the questions are just posted directly in the chat field. So sometimes it's behind what the actual questions are in real time, because I can't talk that fast. So, but all the questions are coming from the chat field. All right, so you see Millard Brown's been playing with the Oberheim 8-voice simulation plugin that just came out. It's absolutely massive, great sounds, but it's a bit CPU hungry. Well, you know, my college, we had an Oberheim 8-voice, so it's a wonderful instrument. So hope you have fun with that. It probably takes a lot of processing to get all those great sounds. And my boss, who hired me like almost 30 years ago, he was director of marketing at Oberheim, so I always have a soft spot for Oberheim. All right, so we have a question. Can a Mac Pro with 16 cores, will Cubase utilize all these cores? Yes. So once again, but make sure that, you know, depending on how your project is loaded up, you know, how plugins can be spread across cores, you know, could make a difference, but yes, Cubase will use all of those cores. Okay, going through more questions. See that Michael Teams is giving Jan a double scoop of Dutch chocolate ice cream for his Cubase index site. So, all right, great to see that Alexander Plasko is still here. All right. All right, so we have from Sub 403 question: is there a MIDI logical preset that would extend MIDI note until the next note? All right, so let's say if I wanted to do, and I often do this on bass parts. So let's say if I wanted the bass notes to automatically extend, so there's not a, you could probably make a logical editor to do that, or you could probably just go to under MIDI functions and choose legato, and that will automatically do that. If your material is kind of more chord based, so let's say if I wanted to just come over here, let's say, so let's say if I wanted all these chords to automatically extend to the next note starts, if you go to the lengths menu here, you could just say extend. So you could just say apply legato, and that will kind of automatically extend until the next note starts. And that's from the lengths tab in the Midi key editor. So if you just kind of come over here, you can see where the notes are stopping short. So let's say if I just wanted to come here, and we'll change the length of all the notes here, make them all a bit shorter. So now when I just do apply legato, that will just do it across. So you don't even have to do a logical editor preset for that. Okay, so we have a question from Jeff Zabelski. Cubase 11 opens with safe mode window. The application was terminated unexpectedly with option to deactivate all third-party VST plugins. I'm importing old SX projects into new build is why. So generally what that is showing you is that there was a plugin that's trying to be used that's crashing the system. And a lot of people would kind of get stuck in a loop where they couldn't open Cubase because a plugin was crashing it. So at this point, what you have the option is if you're potentially getting stuck in this loop where Cubase won't launch because a plugin is preventing it, that with one selection, if a plugin is causing that you have the option to bypass all of the plugins. So you could open a project, remove plugins, save it, perhaps under a different name, and then be able to open that project without it kind of having to access a particular plugin. So that's kind of the intention of the safe mode. Right, reading through all of my different all the different questions and discussions. Thanks for all the great comments. If you've learned something new, make sure that you hit the like button. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you do that as well. All right, so we have a question from Lawrence regarding the external clock setting. I have a Black Lives micro clock connected to my Mo2 interface and some mic pre's, and my DM2000 PC is connected to Mo2 via Thunderbolt. Cubase on external clock or not. So you could, if you run on internal clock, it's basically going to be using probably your Mo2. But if you wanted the clock to, you could choose an external clock, and that way, if you wanted the Black Lion clock to be the master clock for your studio, or if you wanted the DM2000, you could kind of choose. So, and then you could tell Cubase, where it's getting the clock source from. So, and basically you could just say it's getting clock from, my Mo2, which is, following the clock, from the DM2000 or the Black Lion clock. So it could depend on how your clocking is set up. So a lot of people may have like the Black Lion clock and then feed that out to your Mo2 or feed and to your DM2000. Or you may say, okay, I really like the DM2000 clock, and I want the Black Lion to distribute that clock. So it could really kind of depend on how you have it set up. So, if you want, and how you want your Mo2 to be configured. So if you're going analog from your DM2000 to your Mo2, or if you're going digital, if you're going digital, you definitely want the clocks to be synchronized. But so it could depend, and it could depend, Lawrence, on your exact configuration. If you're using the Black Lion clock as the master for the Mo2 and the DM2000, or if it's acting as a clock distribution from your Mo2 to your other device. So it gets complicated. I wish there was an easy answer. All right, so we have a question, how to avoid Cubase scanning plugins at every startup. Thank you. So when Cubase starts up for the very first time, it actually will do like a quick diagnostic test and measure the latency of the plugins. So generally it doesn't do that every single time, but you know, a lot of times, you know, you may have an operating system update, a graphics driver update, and that could cause problems in stability within your plugins and how your plugins interact with different components. So that's why, you know, you'll see, you know, most programs will scan the plugins on startup, but they may not show it to you. So, you know, I think that's kind of the intention of it. All right, great to see Ted Springman on a hangout from Sherman Oaks. All right, wonderful to see the tuba guy back. He just finished his master's thesis. Congratulations on that. All right, and Captenergy Music is also joined. So we see any word on Midi 2.0. So, you know, we have some of the components, you know, the VST, you know, plugin specification was updated. So there's a lot of components, you know, we're kind of, the whole Midi 2 scenario is kind of a chicken and eggs scenario at this point. You know, it could be, maybe that's not a fair analogy. So a lot of the Midi 2.0 aspects are, you know, coming, I think, in future hardware, but there's not a lot of hardware that does it. And as far as, you know, with MIDI polyphonic expression, Cubase has done that for years already. We kind of pioneered the whole concept with note expression. That really kind of was the genesis for, you know, the MPE functionality. But when we get into like the different, yeah, I forget what they're calling it, where you could have kind of like, you know, more of an extensive handshake between hardware synths so that they kind of operate more in a plugin format. But, you know, within the VST3 specification, you know, long time ago, you know, for like 12 years, we've already not been bound by a lot of the aspects of the MIDI spec, the previous MIDI spec, you know, so you could already have more than 128 velocity layers if you're so inclined. So we're just kind of waiting for a lot of hardware components, but I know that our developers are, you know, actively keeping, you know, coordinating with the engineering teams at Yamaha, you know, so we'll just have to wait and see as more hardware comes out that supports it. All right. So you may hear my son enjoying his spring break in the background. Sorry about that. He's having fun. Excuse me. Michael Teams wants everyone to whack the like button, so I'll concur. Okay, so we have a question from New York, New Jersey. Is there a way to have more than one project active at the same time, i.e. switch between projects faster than the bolt icon? So currently you have multiple projects open, but as you mentioned, the bolt icon that we see in the upper left-hand corner, that determines which project is active. So, but currently, you know, that is the way to load and unload all the data necessary for starting a project. So, you know, sometimes if you have faster, if you have an SSD drive, if you're doing a lot of samples, that could greatly speed up the opening time. But, currently we have, I think if you had two projects open, that could cause, like when you hit play, do you want both projects to play? So I think it makes sense. But, there's ways to, if you don't have like an SSD drive, if that's taking a while, or you're an orchestral composer, it's just going to take a while. But, you can, open up projects. And when you go to open a project, you often get prompted with, I want it to go here. Do you want to activate the project? And you could say no, and you could still copy data from this project to another project. But currently it's one active project at a time. So. Okay, so we just see from Jeff Zabelski, question, I can't get the same settings from HSO, violin solo, viola solo, cello solo, trio. The expression maps don't work right anymore. Midi tracks versus instrument tracks. One doesn't apply the expression maps. So, both MIDI tracks and instrument tracks will work the same way. But if you're going back from previous versions, at one point HSO was its own standalone instrument, and then it had migrated to a sound set that worked inside of the Hallian Sonic and Hallian families. So it could be that maybe those particular projects that you're having problems with were for the previous Hallian symphony, the Hallian Symphonic Orchestra player, and not playing back directly inside of the Hallian Symphonic Orchestra sound set for Hallian Sonic. So that could be the difference, Jeff. So maybe if you kind of look around that way, that could be, and when it's referencing that plugin to Hallian Symphonic Orchestra player, that could be causing maybe some of the problems. All right, so you see a nice comment from Jan at CubaseIndex.com. Says, I think Greg is going to set a new standard for our Hangout show. We'll be all over YouTube. So I'm glad you guys are finding it useful, and hope everyone's learning some new tricks. And if you learn something new, make sure that you hit the like button. All right. Okay, so we see from UMF TV Roblox, just got Cubase first time, so sick. So welcome to our Hangout. We hope to see you more, and whatever questions you have, just enter them in on the chat field. Okay, we just see a question from John. Hi, is there a way when duplicating a guitar track, panning the two to the far left and right, but having the duplicated track slightly different so it sounds as if it's a double tracked guitar? All right, so we just jump to... Okay, so let's say if I have this guitar part, I'll just solo this one. All right, so let's say we'll pan this hard left, or let's pan this hard right, and I'll just copy it up here. And we'll pan the top one hard to left. So let's say we now have these. You know, what I see some people do is, you know, just do like a little bit of like track delay, and you can do this in milliseconds. So if you want to come here, so let me just go ahead and pan this one so you'll get the full effect. All right, and so this will be pan left, this will be pan, let's say, all the way to the right. So sometimes just doing like a little bit of like this little track delay setting can get you a really nice effect. So that's it, 40 milliseconds, and can kind of take the same double track guitar. And let's say if I put it at 0, and we'll just rewind. So you're not really gaining too much, but say minus 43. That could give you a nice effect. It takes, you know, without having to do a duplicate performance, you know, when you don't have maybe a duplicate performance, that could be a great little trick just to do like a little bit of a track delay on one, and that could help. And we see Robbie Bowling mentioned that with the UA platform that you could hide plugins that you don't own and show the ones that you do own. So. Okay, so we should see a question. How do you get your download access code? So as soon as you purchase your license, you can, you know, so when you purchase a license electronically from a dealer or the Steinberg online shop, you get a download access code. If you purchase a box version of Cubase, like at a music dealer, in the box, you will have a download access code, and that you could enter into your My Steinberg account, and that will generate a license for you, and that will allow you to get access to the download as well. So that will give you, so your download access code once entered in. So if you go to your My Steinberg account, just enter that in, and you'll be all set to go. All right, great to see Tan Mei on the Hangout. All right, so I just see a question. Can you also use 32-bit plugins with 32-bit float mode? So when this could be very confusing because, you know, the terminology is kind of, you know, we see 32 and 64, and obviously 64 must be twice as good or twice as better. But when we deal with 32-bit plugins, those are kind of like the older plugin generation that, you know, was limited in its computer memory, where the plugin itself could only access, depending on your system, 2 or 4 gigabytes of RAM. Now it's, you know, it's not uncommon. You can see in the discussion here, people are running 128 gigs of RAM, and that needs to for a plugin to be able to access more memory, that needs to be a 64-bit, and we'll call it like 32-bit memory addressing, 64-bit memory addressing. So the terms get thrown around interchangeably, which is confusing. So 32-bit memory addressing plugins are kind of almost about 18 years old at this point. So those aren't used and they cause a lot of system instability. Now the processing engine, so when we add effects and EQs on particular tracks, that the processing engine can be, in Cubase has always been traditionally 32-bit floating point, but was raised with version 10 to 64-bit precision. So that, you know, the processing of the audio engine doesn't really have any correlation or direct relation with the memory addressing. So, but now just about all plugins are 64-bit, and we have the processing of, like, when we have fades or reverb tails, to process those with double precision. So the two, while they sound like they're related, they're not really related, but, you know, so, you know, you could always use, you know, the memory addressing of the plugin format is not contingent or have any effect on the processing precision of the audio engine. But, you know, you know, in general, stay away from 32-bit memory address plugins. So they'll often just be referred to as 32-bit. All right, let's read through some more comments and questions. Question, is it possible to change the name of MIDI logical custom presets? Also, where are they stored on Mac? So I think we did this on the last Hangout that it wasn't stored. You know, that you couldn't just rename the plugin, but let's take a look at the storage location on Mac. So let me just go to my Finder. I think it's going to be in your preferences. So I'm going to go to Finder. I'm going to hold down the Option key, because Apple doesn't think I'm responsible enough, unless I know that, to get to my library folder. Okay, so, and if you go to library, you want to go to preferences, and then you'll see probably Steinberg, Cubase. All right, so we have Cubase 11, and in here I think we'll have presets. And logical edit. And this is where all of your user presets are stored here. So go to your library, to preferences, to Cubase 11, to presets, and then look under logical editor, logical edit. And then you could see all of your logical editor presets directly there. And you could change a name there if you wanted to. All right, so it's great to see Speedy on a Hangout. Hope you're doing well. All right, so we have a question. Every time I open the media bay, the folders take a long time to open for the first time. Is there a way to improve the speed of this? So it could be a preference that is set. So, you know, when you go to our media bay, we could just access kind of our different folders. So if I wanted to come over here to, you know, my VST sound, and let's go over here to my different folders. This is how mine is working. Now, one of the things that you could have set up that some people have set up by default, if you go to the preferences, we can just come over here and then go to preferences to media bay. And there is a preference for scan folders only when media bay is open. Probably uncheck that. So if you have that checked, every time that you go through, open up Media Bay, that's when it starts doing its scan. If you close it, open and close it, it never finishes its initial scan. So once it's finished its initial scan, then all that information is automatically going to be referenced. So just make sure that you don't have, again, preferences to Media Bay, that you don't have scan folders only when Media Bay is open. And this will the scanning will go on in the background. So, it may take a couple times while you have Cubase open for it to complete its scan if you have, tens of thousands of audio files and samples and presets. So just be aware of that. But make sure you don't have that preset enabled. All right, so we see sub 403 is going to try to make it to our Zoom session next Tuesday. So it'd be great to see you. All right, so we see comment from Tim Weinheimer. Thanks, Greg, for the last hangout, for showing us how to group effects track so easy to set now. Thanks. All right. Okay, so just see, got to be a better way of creating drum maps in Slate drums. Can you help? So a lot of times, depending on if it's, I'm not sure if they're VST3, but the one thing that you may try, but I know with Groove Agent, I could come over here. So let's say I open up a Groove Agent kit. Okay, so let's say I have, this particular kit going on. And I wanted to see the drum map. I could just come right over here and let's go to the first. And then you could also, if it's a VST3, there is the capability of this where you could create a drum map from the instrument. And now when we go to edit on this particular event, the drum map from that particular instrument. So you could try to see if you do that. But once depending on how many drum sounds you have, and I've created drum maps in the past, like if you look at the drum maps for like the Alesis D4, I just made them probably in 1992 or 3 or something like that. But, but if you go to your drum map, just get your drum map set up. And at this point, you could, just click on the sound and find out what each MIDI note is and just type it in and save it once and store that as a track preset. But, once you have that drum map created, if you're using kind of the same consistent drum tones, just, create the drum map once. If it doesn't work with the, create drum map from instrument function. All right. Okay, just reading. Okay, so question from Tanmay. Way to automatically change project folder name from Untitled to the name you save your CPR file as. So there isn't a way to do that because, saving your project folder name is actually kind of a part of the operating system. If you're working on this, like let's say if we do, choose to do a new project, in version 11, this behavior change where it'll just prompt for the project folder location. But, once you do this, you could just type in, the project folder name here. So you could just say, okay, let's create a folder. And, because this part of, the process is just using the file browser that's part of your Windows or Mac OS. And you could just, give it a name. So let's just call it Tanmay, and then, you could just change the name within your operating system, but, you know, just be, you know, try to name the folder and name the project, you know, shortly, you know, with the same name to keep your file management kind of working for you as opposed to against you. Okay. Okay, so I see some discussion maybe running like Cubase 8.5 to get 32-bit VST plugins. So I just see a comment. I have Cubase 11 Pro 8.5. Doesn't have. If you have your Cubase 11 Pro, you could always download like earlier versions of Cubase, you know, back to SX1 if you wanted to, and install that, and your Cubase 11 license will work for earlier versions of it. Okay, so we have a question from Michael Teams, and since he's been generous enough to pass out ice cream for people, and he's just a great guy, we'll answer it for him. Howdy, Greg. We would like to know how to set up guitars like the old days when the guitar signal's on one side and the effects are on the other. Basic fake stereo. Thanks, La Leche. All right, so let's go back to, let's say, our guitar parts that we had here. So I did kind of like just that little separate spread. So I'm going to add just a reverb to these two tracks here. So I'll just add an effects channel and put in just a little revelation. Okay, so we have that going on, and now we have our tracks. And they're both feeding. So let's say if I wanted to go to this particular track, what you do now, we'll open up this channel. We'll see our send. So we see this is panned all the way to the left. So we'll go to this particular track, and we're going to hear this is panned all the way to the left. But I wanted the effect to be panned all the way to the right. So in the sends, we'll see at the bottom a destination and a panning. So now I could say I want to pan the guitar where it's panned to the left. I want to pan the reverb in the opposite channel. And I'll go to the next source here. So let's say, okay, I just want it to... let's go to the next channel, and I wanted to kind of do the same thing here. So this one, the guitar is panned all the way to the right, and there's a default setting where it'll follow the panning, but now I want its reverb all the way panned in the opposite channel. So this is the classic 80s. We have two guitar players in the band, and I'm going to pan each guitar player and put the reverb in the other channel. So let's go ahead and listen to this. So we'll have this one panned left, but the reverb in the right, and the opposite for this. So at this point I could, you know, just listen to that, and this will give you kind of your fake stereo. So that way the effects could be panned independently. Just come over here and, you know, click on not only the destination, but the bottom, the panning. And then that way that one stereo effect can be panned independently across multiple tracks. Okay. Okay, so I could just see, not sure, I think it's a question, but pre-mastering in Cubase. So yeah, I'll show you, you know, you could do a lot of processing. So it could really depend on what you define as mastering. So if you wanted to take a particular track and be able to kind of do like further, more extensive processing on it. You could do that in Cubase, but if you're delivering for multiple formats and burning CDs, you know, that's when a dedicated mastering tool like Wavelab is really helpful. But let's say I just have, I want to do some processing on this track. So I could just take, you know, some people will load up their project and do, you know, run a lot of plugins on the master bus. So if you wanted to say, okay, I just want to come here and go to like my frequency EQ. All right, so let's say I just wanted to have this be maybe like a shelf EQ. So I'll just come here, let's adjust. And we could kind of just, and what's kind of cool about this is as you make adjustments, you could put this on and you could just kind of hear the particular changes as you're making them. So let's say I wanted to bring out maybe the saxophone, but only in the center channel. We could have like mid inside. So I could say, okay, let's just grab 6 mid. And that's not going to pan it on the edges. But maybe I want to take the drums here. And let's go to the sides. So I wanted like the ride to be a little more processed on the outer edges of the panning spectrum. And then if you wanted to run other plugins like, you know, different limiters or maximizers, some people, depending, could also just run like Magneto, get some more analog goodness. And let's run to say maximizer. So if I wanted to take my project from there, it's a little thumpy in the low end. And let's run maybe an imager. And this would allow me to make like the high ends wider. So you can take something from there to there. So you could do a lot of that type of processing. So if you're looking just to enhance the sound and kind of, you know, run your project through, you know, additional plugins, and you could also do this with all of your supervision going on. You could do that as well. Clear my throat. Hang on. So you could definitely, you know, we have lots of people do all their mastering in Cubase and Nuendo. Some, you know, just love the feature sets inside of Wavelab. You know, it's kind of really, you know, set for, you know, design, purpose-built tool for that. All right, just reading through comments. I see comments that Gareth hasn't made his appearance yet, so he's probably on already. I'm just catching up. All right, Jazz Dude wants people to smash the like button. And Michael Teams adds a Hulk smash. You don't even have to turn green. All right. All right, so we just see from Aman, feeling blessed because I just found this. Sorry, my chat field just jumped. Let me just find... All right, just trying to find my spot. Okay, so I think I'm... All right, so Aman is just saying, feeling blessed because I just found this, just joined, even when I don't use Cubase, but looking forward to use it in the near future. That's great. Thanks for joining us and welcome. We hope to see you on future live streams. All right, so we see that I think the musical mode description helped for Robbie Bowling. So, all right, great to see Sable Winters on a Hangout. All right, so I just see from Tanmay, just curious is there a way to make automatic random chord progressions using Project Logical Editor or something within Cubase for inspiration and quick ideas to work on? Just click of a command. So I don't know of a function that would do that in the Project Logical Editor. I'll just take a quick look. But I don't think we could randomize the chord track. I don't think that we could. Yeah, so I don't think there's any particular, but if you wanted to just try like, random aspects within a chord track, so it's not going to necessarily generate a chord progression for you, but just, I've seen people do all sorts of stuff like, okay, I'm here in the chords and I want to go to the chord assistants and, just kind of start with the circle of fifths and, and just, let's add a next chord and just spin the dial if you want. And okay, let's try G flat. Let's try, and, just kind of come over here and just add, random chords like that, but it's not kind of an automatic generate a random chord progression type of function. Okay. All right. So we have a question from Robbie Bowling. If I'm looking for a kick or cymbal shot that was recorded at a certain speed, can it be altered to sound correctly at other speeds? So usually like a lot of samples, if it's like a one shot, you don't really have to do much, so let's say if I just wanted to go, two different, sample sets, let's say, So let's just say if I was looking for kick, I would just so if we're just auditioning, this, like, you don't really have to do anything if it's like a one-shot sample, regardless of the tempo, doesn't really matter so much to to do it. I don't think you have to do anything special for like one-shot samples that were recorded at different tempos. All right, so I just see from Jeff Zabelski, my CC121 must have the on button on to start Cubase, or it won't respond. The app must be closed and restart it. Will there be driver updates in the future for the CC121, Cubase 11 Pro, Wavelab 7? So I'm not sure if you're starting it after Cubase or if it's powered on after Cubase or before Cubase. So I don't have any problems on, and I switch my CC121 between 3 different computers, but I don't have any problems with that. So I'm not sure, I'm not sure if you're connecting through a hub or if you're connecting directly to the computer. And also see, if I'm not sure, because you could power it partially from the USB, but it may not power like the fader from just a USB connection. But if you could let us know that, Jeff. But I think it kind of works as you expect it to. So maybe it's something like not getting enough power through a hub or something like that. Okay, so I just see, why does my Cubase keeps crashing? So a lot of times it could be, using a lot of, when it does crash, you may see that. Hang on just one second. I'm going to talk to my son. Bear with me. Apologize for the interruption. Okay. Okay. So when you see, going back to why does my Cubase keep crashing? So a lot of times it's going to be third-party plugins that cause it to crash. So I would, definitely make sure, try running it without third-party plugins and see if you could get it to the point where, okay, when I'm using this project and I'm using this plugin is introduced, that's what's causing it to crash. And sometimes when you get the safe start message, you'll often get a message saying this plugin crashed, and that's why it gives you the option to bypass those on the next startup. Okay, so let's see, we have a from Whistling Simon John Dundas. Hi, Greg. I love these sessions. What should I do about the real-time algorithm deactivation warning I get when I load certain projects, often with acoustic guitar loop recorded? So it could be, when you go to different algorithms and if you do different functions, like it could be like when you go to, let's say when you go to Very Audio, Very Audio works with this, specific algorithm that will, so it needs that algorithm for the pitch detection and analysis and processing. So you may get a message when you're going into like Very Audio that it may switch the algorithm to like solo mode. So I'm not sure if you're getting the message if you're trying to do something with Very Audio specifically. And it could be if you have a loop maybe that's been frozen or been kind of like if the loop is frozen and then you're trying to put it into musical mode, sometimes you may get a message like that as well. But if you have a particular project that you want to share, I'd be happy to take a look at it, and you could email or share the project to me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. Okay, Greg, can you give us an insight on how you program drums so well, kind of like a small masterclass? So I'm probably a pretty horrible drum programmer. I just don't do it much anymore. But let's say if I wanted to start with something, I'll just do quickly a new project. Okay. All right, so I'll just load up kind of. Okay, so let's say I'll just take a drum kit I've never really played with before. So, some some tricks that, are for those of that, had programs and, and had to program on drum machines before we had the option to. So I'll just take this and, knowing what sounds you have is always helpful. But let's say, so I have my drum kit that's been extracted from Groove Agent. So let's say I could listen to the different sources here. So let's just say, okay, I'm just going to play and I'll just do like one measure. And let me just put this in. So that's a pretty long kick. So let's say maybe I just want the kick. So I just have my grid here. So let's say, okay, let's put a snare. All right, so things that people do that are bad. Often are hi-hats. So if you just kind of come here. I'm just going to do another kit. Let me just, sorry about that. that one has some odd things with the samples. I'll just go to this project where I have kind of okay, so same concept here. So I'll just do a quick one measure loop. You know, and being able to use kind of the drum editor itself is always good because, you know, you could see all your different components. You know, so just say, okay, I want to kick. All right, so the typical thing that most people want to avoid is come here and say, okay, I want. All right, I'm just going to set this to. You know, and some of the stuff that I would like to do is just kind of come over here and put in like an extra. I think I have like a different solo state. I'm just going to try one more thing. Sorry about that. Okay, so okay, so I mean, we'll again just come here to the part. Let's load up the drum map. All right, so I'll find, let's say, our kick. So, you know, a lot of people, so I'm not sure why it's not. Let me just try it on. Okay, so now if I wanted to do, so this is kind of like probably what you don't want to do is something. All right, so if you have something like that, let's make it more interesting. So let's just offset so I just moved this note 16th note earlier. All right, so the hi-hats are incredibly annoying, not because of the rhythm, but just because of the velocity. So just come here and we can take the same exact rhythm, but just dropping the velocity on every other note. And I wanted to come here, let's just move a couple of these randomly. And I want to put in different rhythmic values. So I wanted maybe like a dotted eighth notes for my triangle. And let's put in eighth note triplets for my bongos. And let's have like a little more just differences in volume. So I just want that to be like, you know, everyone expects this to be on everyone is expecting your snare here. So let's put in a different snare. You know, let's put in a tambourine on beats 2 and 4. But everyone expects that, so let's just move this one over a little bit. Let's introduce dynamics. And, you know, just slow the tempo down here from 120. And maybe I want to take the hi-hats now and just come and go to my Quantize panel, and I could just say I want to quantize just the hi-hats, and I could now apply that quantize to just the tracks or to everything, or just the hi-hats. And I wanted a different kick here. So you could do stuff like that and just, you know, have different rhythmic variations, different feels, and I could choose to quantize. So if I wanted to put this swing on just the hi-hats but nothing else, I could just double click and select those and apply the quantize. And now that hi-hat's a lot more interesting. And I wanted to take these and apply. So you could just kind of make up stuff like that and just do little variations, you know, over time as well. So you could just take, you know, something that's kind of really simple and be able to just kind of draw in, you know, different components of it, and, you know, play with the quantizing, play with lengths, you know, as well. So little things that you could do that make, like, that could take something that's boring and expected to more interesting and unexpected. You know, just have those move offset stuff by, you know, 16th notes, you know, come over here and say, okay, I wanted these 2 claps. And give it a little bit of dynamic motion, a little bit of rhythmic motion. And you could come up with different patterns. I don't think I'm a good drum programmer. I just don't concentrate on it. But, you know, I can tell you what makes a lot of people's drum programming not good. So hopefully that's helpful. All right, so thank you, Jazz Dude, for helping people in German. Your German's much better than mine. Okay, so we have a question. How do you draw every other note in a MIDI editor instead of just quantized grids similar to tracker DAWs? I'm not familiar with that, but if I wanted to, you know, just come over here. So let's say if I have this as I'll just do it as a instrument track. Okay, so you could obviously just kind of there's several different approaches. So if you wanted to just so if I wanted to draw notes in, we could. So I have my, let's say my values here are set to eighth notes, my quantized value. So I could just draw notes in like so. So if you wanted to, do stuff like that, you could also put it into step entry. So let's say if I click on a little step here, I could hit the arrow key. And then you could and you could also just choose to, if you take this out of step mode, let's say, okay, I wanted to, take these notes, and you could also just come right here to, let's say if we switch this to be 16th notes, I could just come over here and you could, just split, or you just hold down the option key and click, you could split the notes here. So if you wanted to do but if you wanted to just move, then if you just hold down Command or Control, you could but it's really kind of wherever you want, but you could navigate anywhere you want. If you just hit like N or B, you could navigate to the next note. And you could also just, I think if you just figure out what the key command is, but you could navigate backwards by the snap values for different notes using the arrow key. So you could just kind of draw in notes kind of wherever you want in the grid. So if you say, okay, I just want to draw in a note there, I want to draw in a note there, it's no problem, but you could just so that's how you could do stuff like that for drawing every other note. Just see from Marco, you still didn't fix that bug with Midi for 4 months or more. So I'm not, if you could refresh my memory, Marco, what the exact bug was. All right. Okay. So hello, how to organize mute and unmute. All right. So let's say if I'm here, so we could mute, unmute, and I think it's, let me just come here. So just M to mute and unmute. So let's say if I have these tracks selected, so that will kind of toggle the status of the mute. So if one track is muted and the other isn't, you could hit M and that will toggle the mute status. And we just see if there's another mode for that. So let me just check my keyboard shortcuts. So I think it's Option M. So that will allow you to mute, like if, let's see, if the object is selected, so you can do Option M to mute. Let's see if there's no track selected, and I come here, I have that track selected, I just, so you could experiment with some of those different things. So let's say, so you can mute events, unmute objects. So so the mute will just kind of toggle the mute status for the particular selected tracks. All right, reading through comments. You see that Michael Teams is beyond famous in Pablo too. That's good. We're lucky we have so many famous people on. All right, seeing more great comments about Oberheim instruments. All right, so lots of discussion on randomized chord generation. All right, so we have Kenny checking in from Northeast England. Great to have you on the Hangout. Okay, hi Greg, a question about Open Note Expression Editor in Cubase 10.5 key editor. I could double click on any note to open it. In Cubase 11, it deletes notes instead. Is there a way to switch it to Cubase 10.5 way? So really all you have to do is, let's say if we're going on here, is just this little icon. So once this is enabled, this little E, you double click, it'll now open up the note expression editor, toggle that behavior, double click, and it will just delete the note. So just click on that little E, make sure that it is lit up, and now when you double click, it will just open up the note expression editor. So right there in the editor. And I think you could also, it's maybe from the project, there's kind of a hidden let's see if it's, but yeah, there's a menu function for it as well. So, but yeah, just click on that little E and that will switch the behavior to the previous generations. We had big discussions about that. Okay, so I see kind of a further clarification from Lawrence with his clocking. Says PC is only connected to the Motu black line clock, connected to everything except PC. So as long as your Motu is set up for that, you can just tell your Motu that telling Cubase to synchronize directly from Motu, and it's probably, if it's doing it via the BNC cable, you could just choose that in your studio setup, and that way Cubase will know it's externally clocked, and you just choose the clock source, and there you'd probably just choose the BNC word clock or whatever terminology that the Motu is going to use for its driver. All right, so we have a question. I want to connect S3L, I think, Avid with Cubase 10.5 Windows 10. Is it possible? Yeah, so actually Steinberg and Euphonics, who developed the protocol for Yukon, we kind of developed that jointly, but all you have to do is if you go to your studio setup, you want to click on Add Device, and here you just want it to be a Yukon device, and that's really kind of all you had to do to enable Yukon, and that's kind of the communication protocol that will be used for that. Now I'll probably get Yukon lace error messages forever now. All right. So yeah, you could definitely use those with Cubase. Question, is it possible to quantize audio tracks within a project at different settings? Example, guitar part quantize at quarter notes, and another track a bass at 30-second notes. It's an ambitious bass line. But yeah, definitely no problems whatsoever to do that. It's really just depending on what the current quantize value is set to. So if you wanted to, we'll come over here. Just find, let's say if I just go to here. So I have this particular part, and let's say if I want to quantize it, I could just choose audio warp, choose my value. Okay, quantize. And now I wanted to go to the guitar part, and here I could just choose quarter note and quantize. And that's really all you'd have to do. So it's no problem. You know, it's just on a per selected event basis, and not limited to being on a project. Okay, so you see a question, can I remap buttons to Mickey controller? So maybe a MIDI controller. So if you wanted to, you could come over here to the studio setup, and if you have like a quick generic remote, you could say this button, and you could just do like a MIDI learn. You know, it's like, so I'll just move, let's say, my modulation wheel here. So it's controller 1, and we could say is command is assigned to, you know, add track. So as soon as I have controller 1, I should get like an add, you know, so you could just set up your controller to respond to MIDI messages, but go to studio setup, click on the plus sign, and you could just add a generic remote right there. All right. All right. So let's take a look. So Michael Teams is sending out more ice cream. Okay. So just see time warp on multiple tracks or folder track. So if you want it to do, so there's, currently there's no multi-track warping, but if you wanted to do time warp, which is where you find, time warp has a kind of a different name function in Cubase to kind of manually create tempo maps. So I know that this is kind of a very often requested feature, but you can do, if it's in a folder track, you can do like a multi-track kind of drum quantizing, but it doesn't automatically take everything in a folder track and just do kind of a warp across multiple tracks. Currently, it had to be done on individual tracks. Okay, so you just see from John Costigan, thanks for the polyrhythm example in the drum editor. Gave me a couple useful ideas. That's good. Okay, so just see Mackie control. How can any keys be remapped? So I think there's a set of user-defined functions. But if you go to, let's say, Mackie control, you could, when you select the Mackie control here, you have user A, B plus your function 1. So you could choose your category and, just be able to, do whatever function that you want. And those are kind of user definable controls. So just select it here, and then you could find the category of controls and be able to kind of take that over. Okay, so just see, okay, so we have Daniel checking in from Austria. So you see Michael Pierce is saying, ooh, Haas effect. So probably with the two guitars. Okay, so we see from Jeff Zabelski, redoing expression maps most worked, but the trill half step whole step triggers for my HSO solo string tracks. Now learning curve and note expression map settings. So sometimes when you go into the expression maps, let me just open up a different project so we can show it. Okay, so let's say if I wanted to, so I'm in, let's say the editor here, and let's say I'll just import the key switches. So sometimes, if you find that it's reverting back to the wrong expression, so maybe the trill, sometimes it'll default back to the very first expression map. Sometimes just adding an empty expression at the top can help. So you could give that a try, Jeff. Okay, we have a question from Florian. If you change the volume of a single instrument in the volume track and the volume at the beginning and end do not match, is there a way to set the volume to the same level on the right side marker? So, all right. All right, so let's say I just have sound example in here. deactivate the project, that would help. Okay, so let's say if I have this, and let's say this is slightly down. If there's no node in between, if you select the first node, you could just go directly to, and I think that there is a key command where you could, so if you just come here, let's say I copy this value, and let's say go back here, hit the right arrow. So let's say I select this node, hit the right arrow, then I could just paste that value to the same. So, you can navigate between the automation nodes, once you have one, using the left and right arrows, and then you could copy the value directly from the info line if you wanted to. Okay, so we have a question. Any tips on doing a clean install? I seem to have many issues with mine. I don't want to lose anything when I do it. What I would do is, just take your preferences folder and just, try moving all of the preferences to a particular location. And if you have multiple versions, let's say if you have Cubase 9, 9.5, 10, 10.5, 11, that if you move like just the Cubase 11 preferences over, it often will look to a previous version to migrate the preferences to, kind of to make it easier for the user, to have all the settings kind of, have a seamless transition. But, if you move all of your preferences and, physically don't copy them, but move them to a neutral part where you could copy them back if you needed to. At that point, you'll get kind of the default clean, almost like a virgin install of Cubase with no preferences that may have been carried over for the last 12 years or something like that. See a nice tip from Jeff Sabelski. Save your emails after purchasing licenses with the access codes. The download manager works great. Sorry for hitting my mic. I'm not the best guitar player, so what VST is the best one in your opinion? Need a guitar for strumming and solo play mode. So there's some that will do, different strumming patterns pretty well. So, there's like T guitar is one that is sold on the Steinberg online shop, and that's like a Taylor guitar. The guys who did the originals, some of the team that did the original virtual guitarists, UJam, they have some new virtual guitarist ones out that I use on my personal studio computer. But for doing like, just a quick, like acoustic guitar type of thing, the T guitar is pretty fantastic for that. So if we just want to open it up, and you could play all the different instruments as you want to work for it, but you could also just kind of play the different chords. Let me just see if I have my controller kind of. So as I just finger a chord, sorry, I have my phone on my MIDI controller, but so you could do or just ring the chord. And when you get into more the interface for it, you could choose to have patterns that you can trigger as well. So you can say, okay, I want a pop pattern at 70 beats a minute, and or if you say, okay, this pattern on this particular key, I want it to be more of a folk pattern, let's say at 106. So you could trigger like individual patterns, but this is really geared at acoustic guitars. But you can check out some of the UJam stuff as well. And I think there's an Asian company, Ample Sound, that a lot of people like, and I think they have a lot of free stuff. And a Jazz Dude just mentioned start with the Ample guitar. Okay, so we see how can I get a better shuffle quantize mode process. So let's say if I have, generic pattern, there is a quantizer plugin. So I would come over here. And let's say if I'll just do a quick. Okay, so let's say I just want to do just come up with a pattern that would not embarrass me in front of one of my great R&B record producing friends. Okay, so let me just put this in. Okay, so let's say if I have like super generic drum pattern. I'll turn that down just a little bit. Even taking this, and let's say I want to run it through like a Midi plugin. So I will just come here to Midi insert, and let's go to the quantizer. And you have a swing feel that you could adjust. So let's go ahead and just slow that down. So so you could just do stuff like that. That could give you a good shuffle feel. So again, just kind of very generic. And just add your swing. So you could do some great stuff with just a quantizer plugin, and then if you wanted to, embed those changes. So let's say, okay, I wanted to just kind of hard write that in. We could choose just to go to freeze MIDI modifiers, and now all the notes will just have that particular swing feel written into it. So we just see, hello, how to change the font size directly on track event. So some of these things aren't necessarily adjustable. So if you go to, changing the scaling size on your particular, on your operating system, you could see the font kind of increase, but these are kind of fixed in size and not really user set. Okay, so just see another thing. I'm using my Zoom R24 with actual sound driver. It crashes very often, Cubase, while loading. Any idea how to solve that problem? So is it the Zoom that's crashing? One thing that if it's starting up and you get a message, it could be, you could use the Zoom, I think the R24 as an audio driver. And also probably as a Mackie control. So if you have it configured for Mackie control, I would try to disconnect the Mackie control aspects, and maybe just not run the Mackie control or Mackie Huey and see if that makes a difference. Because it could be the control part that's causing issues with the MIDI communication or driver and not the audio part. So see if you disable the control surface aspect of it, if you have that activated. And and see if that makes a difference. All right, so from Jeff Zabelski, select file. When starting new projects, Cubase 11 doesn't have the new folder option, so we have to create our new folder. Why the change? So the change is just because we had so many people that complained that they were just kind of being put into kind of a folder that they could never find. So it just went from use default location, which was an automatically generated folder, to be asking you to prompt for the project location. So if you want it to go to the default location, just when you go to new project, just click here for use default location. The only change in behavior was it now prompts you for the project location, so that at that point you define a folder and you're kind of aware, you're kind of maybe perhaps involved in the process of where all of your audio files are going to. Before the project starts, to make it a little clear and more obvious. But if you wanted the previous behavior, just change that little switch right there. Okay. So a question from Paul Claridge. I have a UR22C and can't seem to get it to show up in Mixer. There's no hardware tab like the manual says. The menu for hardware is there in the inspector, but won't do anything. So the one thing that's a little odd, and this is kind of from the Yamaha side, and I've been trying to get them to change it for a while, and we keep kind of mentioning it. But if you go to your audio connections, let's say if I have an input, and my input is, let's say, stereo in, and I just want it to have, let's say, my UR20, this is a very similar interface, so my UR24C input 1 and 2. So when I go to record an audio track, I can see my hardware. You see it just listed here as your UR24C, but you may have to go to the audio connections and make sure that you have the output set. So if the output isn't set here, now when I go to the audio, my UR24C isn't. So if you have the control room, which makes the most sense for most people, you may not see that until it's actually activated in the outputs tab. Then when you go to the audio interface, the UR24C will show up with all of its settings, and it's annoying, and I totally get that, and I've been trying to get them to change it so that it wasn't contingent on the output tabs not being defined. All right, I get a double scoop of pistachio mint ice cream. That sounds good. So to see Millard Brown is anxiously waiting for Steinberg's addition to the right hit song button. So next version. A lot of staff in Germany staying up late now, studying musical genres. All right, my chat field just jumped on me. Sorry, let me just scroll back. Thank you for all the wonderful questions. And if you've learned something new, make sure you hit the like button. And make sure you subscribe to the channel. Okay, so we see using Melodyne, I get the incoming audio signal and the process signal at the same time in polyphonic mode. Is there a way to turn off the original source file so I can only hear the processed only? So I'm not sure are you running it via ARA or if you're running it as a plugin. So if you have it as like an ARA function, you could just come here to the extensions. So, once we have an event, you go to the audio to extensions. I'm not sure, and this is kind of how you do spectral layers. Operates in the same way. So now we could just, do the editing within spectral layers or Melodyne here. So that's probably the better way to do it as opposed to having to, if you're running it as a plugin. So try running it via the extensions. All right, great to see Chase on the stream. Hope you got the invitation for the Zoom. All right, see that Millard Brown is going to be tuning into Joe Bonamassa's concert on April 1st. Probably a virtual concert. Got to see him open for Peter Frampton a number of years ago in DC. All right, so Michael Teams wants everyone to hit the like button and subscribe. All right, we have Samuel checking in from Nigeria. Welcome to the Hangout. Thanks for joining us. All right, it's people wanting to say hi to my son so he doesn't throw stuff at my door. So during a live stream. All right. Okay. Hi, Greg. I've seen Groove Agent SE5 has functionality for cymbal chokes and provides 3 different settings for how to invoke the SE. Can you demonstrate how to invoke chokes using those settings? I haven't done this in forever, so I'll probably totally forget and look like a fool, but I'll give it a shot anyway. So let's come over here. I think we'll need something from like the acoustic agent. All right, so let's say, okay, so when I go to the cymbal on the acoustic agent, we can see the choke mode here. So I'm going to put it on choke mode and let's say aftertouch off. So let's say a note off message. Okay, I had to move one of my computers there. So now when I just have the note off message, that chokes the cymbal directly there. So you could also do it with aftertouch. So let's say if I hit, sorry, now my computer is magnetized to my wedding ring. So just simply enable choke, and probably the easiest one to do is just a note off message. So let's say, so you can have it polypressure, aftertouch, or note off. So as soon as I get the note off message, so as soon as I hit the sample and then it gets a note off message, that's when the choke mode is. And let's say I just disable that. So I do note on, note off. It still continues to ring. But when choke is enabled and it's set to note off, so that's all you have to do. So question, is there a way to avoid Cubase automatically using musical mode for WAV files with embedded BPM? So, you know, sometimes it depends on the metadata, but there, you know, I've been trying to get them to, when I drag a file over, that if I hold down maybe a modifier key like Alt or Control, that it will, you know, that you could choose whether you wanted musical mode enabled when dragged or not. But currently there isn't a way. So you'd have to select it and go to the information line and turn off musical mode or do it from within the pool. Okay, if you plan to take part in the Zoom on Tuesday, do you have to register somewhere in advance? All you have to do is send me an email to clubcubase@steinberg.de, and I will send you the Zoom meeting information. So that's all you have to do, and we hope everyone can make it. It's always wonderful for me to meet people, and I get a chance to actually listen to other people talk, which is nice for me, and get to put a face to so many people that I could spend my afternoons with. All right. You see a comment from Jazz Dude. It's pretty funny. In some years, Ryan will enter the stream with his fake troll YouTube account and troll me. And so he would probably, he's trying to figure out how to, he's currently working on he's turning 8 in about a week and a half, but he's currently working on his flying hoverboard that's self-perpetually solar powered, by putting a light on its solar power that charges the solar cells. So, all right. Okay, so I just see, is there a way to use the drum editor grid with the general grid settings in the Quantize panel? Use key commands to quickly change grid sizes in piano roll, but can't seem to do it in the drum editor. So I think the drum editor is, let's take a look. I think it might be fixed, but let me just, okay, so you could have it on adapt to zoom, just by clicking here, or just use the quantize values. So let's say if I switch this to eighth notes, so if I switch this to 16th notes, that you see the grids kind of change to 32nd notes. So just, click here, and then just to the right of grid, you see a plus minus, and then you could just use the quantize settings, or you could use the snap from the drum map if you want it, but just try using the quantize panel there. So just click right there. All right, so we see Sable Winters was dancing, so that's a good thing. I guess my beat sounded like an African beat. I'm just a bad kid from the suburbs, so. You see the rhythm is going to get you, so. It's a great Gloria Estefan song. It's actually, I think it was probably done in Cubase by my friend Clay Ostwald, who's often on these Hangouts. All right, so just see email coming in for the Zoom invite for Tuesday. Okay. Okay, so just see, hey Greg, let me use that drum loop. You just have to give me a thanks in your record when you get famous. And if you win a Grammy, you have to give me, I'll get my writing credit. So. Great comment from Jeff Zabelski. Drum programming, and to watch a real drummer with all the inherent idiosyncrasies of the art of drumming should give up drum programming. Yeah, I have a lot more respect after playing with like really good drummers. So. Okay, question about the slide function for audio containers. Can the slide lock to grid? Thanks. Let's give it a little shot and see if we can get something going here. We may have to set kind of like a sync point, but let me just see if I do this. So if you're not familiar with this, if you have like an audio file, if you hold down like Alt Control or Command Option, depending on your platform, that you can slide. I think this is going to be free positioning and not locked to a particular grid. But as I come here, if I go to the snap, so as we adjust here, we just select this event here. And so what we're doing is we're sliding the event within the container itself. But I don't think that could be snapped. So we could kind of move the whole event, but it's kind of, it's so I don't know of a way to do it. I could play around with it some more and see if there's a way to kind of have that automatically snap to a grid. Right, so just saw another message for a Zoom session come in. So question, can one employ Cubase to create beats like in FL Studio? So which is the easiest? Cubase is easiest. So, and you don't have to leave different, programs to do stuff. So you can just kind of do everything in one environment. Okay, so I just see why is Groove Agent and Hallian Sonic not working when I install Cubase 10.5 Pro? So, it should, there shouldn't be any issues with that working. So sometimes people don't install the latest versions, or sometimes people will install the update to Cubase 10.5 and not do the full installer. So you see a lot of people get the update and they run just the update to the patch, and they may have the program kind of working, but not all the extra content and instruments. So make sure that you've done a full install of all the different components of Cubase 10.5 and not just the update, and then you should be able to see it. So, all right, great to see Kyle Kennedy on the Hangout. All right. Okay, so we have a question. What is the best way to export a lot of tracks at once? All right, so let me just come here and let's say I wanted to export stems. In Cubase 11, they did, pretty massive overhaul to the export audio mixdown. So when we wanted to come over here, we could just say I wanted to do my export audio mixdown, and we could select multiple here. So what I can do now is say, okay, I want all my group channels, my effects channels, all of my audio channels, virtual instruments, everything here. We could choose to make these disabled or dry. So my mono tracks will stay mono, stereo, stereo. If I wanted to have the inserts, the channel strip, if I wanted to include the sends or the master effects, we could include different amounts of the processing. We could, so let's say if I wanted to do this, and once I have this scenario set up, I just say add to queue, and we have this, want to make a unique username. So you may have to just click on the settings, and I'll just put in something else. So and then you just add it to queue and then do the export, and that will make your stems for you of all of your different functions that you want to be activated within your particular project. Okay, so just see from Rodney Foster, how do I make a default template for 11 Pros? I think in previous versions you could save a song as like default.cpr. But if you save it as a template, and so, once you come over here, you could just go to more, and then you could these will be kind of all of your templates that you set up when you do a new project. But let me just see if I save something as a, Okay, so I'll just do just a fake. And this kind of changed over the years, so I haven't done this in a while, but. So I think if we, sometimes it used to be like we could save as a, I think I may have to do some research on this and get back if you want to email me. But let's say if I just do. Yeah, so you could just kind of choose that as your template. And it could be that if it's saved at the same project location as where Cubase is, but I'll do some research on it. Rodney, if you want to send me a quick email, I could show it on the next Hangout. All right, great to see David and Kristen in Nashville. Hope you're having a great spring day. All right, hang on. My son's knocking on the door. Be right back. All right, I'm back. Sorry for the interruption. Okay, so you see a question from Jeff. Is the next Cubase live on Tuesday or just a Zoom session? So we'll do the first 2 hours of the normal live stream, and then we'll do 2 hours of the Hangout for the last 2 hours. So we hope everyone can make it. Okay, I know we had some questions that were mailed in. So let's go ahead to those. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. Okay, so I think Millard had asked this, and I had a brain cramp when trying to figure it out. But his question was about, I think it was Millard, about a MIDI control for toggle A/B settings with a plugin. So as I was doing the index, I noticed that there's probably a better answer than what I gave on Tuesday. So let's say if I have my compressor set up here, and let's say I wanted to now switch to B setting. And let's say I want this as my B setting, that you could kind of switch between like 2 different modes. And you can do this on instruments or on or directly in effect plugins. So let's say if I wanted to now come to my studio setup and I'll go to generic remote. This is under edit. So let's say I will do a quick learn for this function. So let's say I capture that MIDI note. We'll do command and then under edit, it's toggle A/B setting. So now once I'm here on this particular track, you could just use that to toggle the A/B setting. So seems like it should work, but so I would give that a try. So once again, just go to your note expression, make sure that is set. And command edit toggle A/B settings. And yeah, so give that a shot. Okay, another thing that I kind of I figured out a way of doing it after the Hangout, of course, when I was doing my live stream, was how to draw in like a series of 16th notes in the key editor. So let's go ahead and show that. So let's say we have, like this is one measure. So I'm going to just switch tools to my paint tool. And now I set my quantize value here to 16th notes. And now you could just kind of drag across and enter in 16th notes just like that. So instead of using the draw tool where you have to kind of manually draw those in, or if you do that, it will draw in one long note, switch that to the paint tool. And or the little draw tool here. And now we could just grab the draw tool. So if you wanted to draw in like hi-hats quickly, you could just kind of paint in a bunch of 16th notes like that. So okay, we also had a question mailed in, is like, instead of having to manually create warp markers, how could you add a bunch of warp markers automatically to an audio event? So I'll come over here. Let's say we'll activate this project. Okay, so let's say if I go to my hit points and I've now had Cubase automatically calculate the hit points for me. Let's say, okay, I want to lower the threshold just a little bit. And if I wanted to do just like stretching, what we could do now is just say, let's create warp markers. So once I do that and I go to my audio warp and I activate free warp, now I don't have to put in like an anchor marker before, and I could just freely position each of these notes. So again, once you do the hit points, choose to create warp markers, and then when you go to the audio warp settings, you could free warp then all of the different points, and then you could just kind of tweak the rhythmic placement of different positions. Okay, so we got this question sent in from Jan, and since he does such a wonderful job with the Cubase index, we're going to answer it for him. I think I sent it via email as well. It says, I got a question from a friend. How many number approximately of samples and MIDI are included with Cubase 11 Pro? So I did a quick count, and I think it's over 32,000 loops or instrument presets. I think I counted up in a calculator here. So 30,239 roughly. I may have missed a folder or two, but so if you want to know, just bragging rights to your friend that they have 30,000 reasons not to write, you know, of why they could be writing a great song. So And Jan was nice enough to send some nice comments about the live streams, which is always great. Okay, we covered that one already. All right. Hey, Greg. In Superior Drummer, I switch on follow host to sync SD3 with the tempo timeline in Cubase, but sometimes I'd like to interchange that behavior so that the spacebar stops SD3 and Cubase would follow. So is it possible that Cubase Pro 10.5 acts as a slave, accepting my virtual instruments as a host? Thank you. And this is from Martin in Hamburg. So I believe that, it would do it in some plugins can generate MIDI timecode or SMPTE timecode that Cubase can sync to, but I don't think that's Superior Drummer 3 will actually transmit any sync data to Cubase. So it could be done, but I don't know of many plugins that do that, because if you have multiple tempo changes and time signature changes, that it's often best to have it in one central part inside of the host and let the other things kind of follow and slave to that. So I think it's really a limitation of, the plugin not being able to, generate that information for Cubase. But, if it could spit out MIDI timecode, Cubase would gladly sync to it. Okay, so we had a question about, let's just do a new project for this. Okay, so I'm going to just, okay, so let me just do an empty project. Okay, and I'm going to be cognizant of what folder I'm going to use for this. So let's say I want to go to create empty, and we'll call this March 26th. Okay, and I'm going to just drag in an audio loop or an audio file. Let's do one from Noir, my friend Robert Dudzik, who's... Oh, he's an incredible sound designer. You want to watch some great, like the best sound design videos on all of YouTube. Watch Robert's stuff. All right. So let's say in this example, they've taken this particular audio file, and let's say that they've split it up into multiple segments, and each of these segments has been basically rendered in place as separate audio files. So right now we look at my pool window. We have this one particular audio file, and it's put into this folder as the setting. So I'm going to now go to my edit menu, and let's render in place. And I want these to be individual files, as separate events, and I'll do dry channel settings. So we go to, let's say before I do that, I'm going to abort. Okay, so, and this question kind of ties into Media Bay. So let's say if I go to my Media Bay and I go to this computer, Documents, Projects, and I'll go to Hangouts, and I'm just going to make this folder one that's searched, and let's go to March 26th. Okay, so as soon as I go to March 26th, I could see all of my audio files here. Okay, so I'm going to go back to, let's say, my Cubase project, and I will just give this a name, and I'll name all of the files accordingly. So we see this kind of nonsense name. And now I'm going to come over here to edit, and let's do a render in place. And I want these as individual files, as separate events. So we render this. All right, and now we look into the pool and we'll see all these files kind of carried over that were just created. Okay, so we have these particular files. So the question is, I'd like to know how in fewest steps possible to store Cubase audio events as audio clips in the media bay. So in below example, I have 3 separate audio events, which I like to have available as clips in media clip for reuse in various projects. In Cubase, it seems tedious to get to the audio of the event in Media Bay since drag and drop directly to the Media Bay is not allowed. I can't seem to find the right-click Save to Media Bay option anywhere. Is it possible to show the workflow needed in Cubase in order to achieve this? Hopefully, I'm not too many steps. What I'm doing is bouncing the audio event to a file, finding the audio file in the audio pool, finding the file on a disk, moving the file to Media Bay monitored location, triggering a disk scan in Media Bay. It seems overly complicated. So I just did the rendering just like we saw. And when I go back to my Media Bay, that's just automatically been updated. So I didn't have to save anything. It's just in a folder that's being monitored, and all those files that I make are just automatically reflected. So I don't have to do anything special. Now, if it's files that you need to use over and over again, like, and we have this with a lot of our clients that do commercial jingles, or they maybe have like an audio branding thing. Like, you know, I have friends that do like Walmart commercials, and they always have a, you know, like some type of little audio corporate tag. What you can do, another way of doing this is to just come over here and we could export. So I think if we come here, we could choose to export the pool. So we'll just call this branding. Okay, so all my files are still in that particular folder, but what a pool is now I could just say open library. And at this point, let me just see where I saved this to. Let me just see if it's in the Hangouts. Okay, so here's my branding NPL. So I could now just open this pool as its own separate entity. And then just kind of drag and drop from that. So now I have kind of, here's my library. So if you always have to have access to files immediately, save it, you know, save the pool as a library and open up the library, and then you could just access everything. But you know, there's no need to have a right-click save to Media Bay, because it's already automatically just being, you know, you saw that I didn't have to, you know, so I'll just do this again. Let's say I take these files and I will render in place again. So I'll just render with the current settings. And I hit F5, that we could just see all those settings just automatically be updated. So, you know, and if you wanted to, you know, if it's like for files that you need to use over and over again, you know, just, you could also just, you know, take this folder and, you know, save it as, add to a favorite. And then when you know, need to just find your favorite file. So there's a couple of different ways, but I don't see the need myself, and maybe others would disagree, that you have to save it, you know, that there's a necessary function missing to save it to the Media Bay because it's already being done. So. Okay, question. I've been doing a lot of very precise pitch editing lately. Using solely the mouse has proven very annoying and time consuming. I'd like to be able to switch from segments to edit more quickly and use the MIDI assigned knobs to quantize and straighten in Very Audio. Is there a better way to do this? So let me just come over here.
Remember me.
Okay, so let's say if I'm in Very Audio and we're doing Very Audio analysis on this. Okay, and you know, so it used to be that you would hit the tab key and that would kind of switch between your different modes. And with version 10, this is all kind of done you know, within one mode, and you could see kind of all of your smart controls to have access to it. But a lot of times, you know, in previous versions, you would come over here, select a segment, and then you're constantly having to, you know, just slide these two sliders. So you could just kind of do that, you know, directly here from the top or bottom. But if you wanted to assign it to MIDI controls, I'll come over here and let me just assign these. So we'll go to, let's say, our studio setup. So I'll just do a learn for this function. So we have, and then I'll do a learn on fader 2. Okay, so I have 32, 33. So I want it to come here to command, and then I think if we go, there might be a sample editor. Okay, so we get a command. You see, I think there's a sample editor option in here. Okay, so we get a sample editor. And now we could come over here, let's say Very Audio, Quantize Pitch, and Very Audio, let's say straighten. So let's just say I'll just have this set up. So now you could just come over here and quantize your different elements straight from using your controller, like so. So you could give that a shot, but you know, make sure that you're just kind of, you know, a lot of times you may just come here and just say, okay, I just want to quantize and select multiple events, and you could treat your events multiply as well. So, but you could go to your studio menu here again to generic remote and set those up to do Very Audio analysis right there for you and control that. Okay, so first of all, okay, question. First of all, how to quickly randomize, humanize MIDI parts. All right, so let me see if I still have. Okay, so let's say I have in here, just activate this project. Okay, so let's say, Okay, so I'll just put in a couple of kicks. Okay, so let's say I have something. I'll just do it with straight hi-hat here. Sorry about that. Let's get rid of some of that. So let's say I just wanted to put in straight 16th notes. So how to randomize. All right. I'll just put in 8th notes here. Okay, so let's say I have this going on. And I wanted little variations on that. So what you could do is, within the Midi editor, you could, come over here, you could quantize and do different things. But, if you go to just the Midi modifiers, at this point, you could say, I wanted to randomize, let's say, velocity between 36 and 88. So now as we play it, you could just kind of choose to do, so you could say, I want to randomize, the length or position of notes. So I wanted these to be a little early, a little late. And at this point, you could just look at what it's going to do with just like the freeze Midi modifiers. So at that point, you could choose the length of, your different functions. So just look at like in the Midi modifier section, there's whole kind of randomizing functions. And there's also within the key editor or the logical editor. So here I could say, I just want to go to the logical editor and say, okay, I want to take value 2 of notes, and I'll say so we're going to take that, and what I want to do is to take value 2 and randomize, and we can say set to random values between 60 and 100. And you could just apply, different stuff like that. So there's a number of different functions that you could just, choose to do. Let's say I'm going to say inside range 0 to 127. And now I could just randomize the velocity of the notes, as you see here. If you want to randomize the position, if you want to randomize the pitch. So you could do all sorts of different randomizing functions. So let's say there's a lot of automation going on. So the question is, any chance to hide all automation? In other programs, you need just to turn on the button. Seems that in Cubase, it's more hard. So let's say I have an audio track, and there's lots of automation going on with different components. Let's say I just have, so let's say this will be panning. This will be our EQ type. So let's say I have all this. So if you hit F6, this will open up your automation panel. You could just click on hide all, and that will or you can say show used automation. So that's really all you had to do. And you could assign that to a keyboard shortcut in the automation panel. Okay, and how to see which parameters was automated. Again, just click on, so you could hide all and show used from the same location. And you could just access that from, if you see where it says touch here, probably by default, you can click here or hit F6 and that will do that for you. All right, so question. Tempo track with slightly varying tempo of up to 100 values. I wanted to standardize all the values to 180 BPM, but the only way to change all the values was to enter 180 in the left pane tempo value list one by one. I tried to info bar, but I selected all the values to change at once instead of changing to 180. They all change by the same value. So if we have our tempo map set, let's say our tempo track, and we have this set to 180 by default, and let's say, I'll just raise this value up a little more. And the question is, like, if we have a whole bunch of subtle tempo changes here, and we want these all to be 180 without having to change the value of each of these to 180. So let's say if I first wanted to come here, let's just try, I'm just curious if we, so what I would do in this case is have I would just, if you don't want it to change the tempo, is I would have the tempo set to 180 beats per minute and just turn off when you turn the tempo track off, if you want it to be steady, disable the tempo track and have that value set to 180. And, now you could have Cubase will follow all the tempo changes. Now it's just going to play back at 180 beats a minute. Another method that you could do is just come over here to the tempo track and just go to new version and just say, okay, this version, I want it to be 180 beats a minute. So just come here. And then you could go back and forth between different tempo track versions, or just simply turn the tempo track off and it'll play back at a steady tempo. Okay, we're just about out of time. I want to thank everyone for wonderful questions, and for all, if you've learned something new, make sure that you hit subscribe and also that you hit the like button. Great to see that Gareth made it to the Hangout. So send me an email and we'll send the invitation for the Zoom for next Tuesday. That'll be the last Zoom or the last live session of the month. So the last 2 hours, we'll just have a Zoom meetup. So we'll be able just to, so we'll be able to do that. And hope everyone has a wonderful weekend and everyone has great spring weather or fall weather, depending which hemisphere you live in. But we'll see everyone next week. Take care. Bye. Yeah, buddy.